The autumn air smelled of hay, rain, and rust. Sandy Smith stood beside a crooked fence at the Hollow Creek Livestock Auction, watching the small parade of animals pass through the ring. The announcer's voice crackled over the speakers, fast and dry as brittle grass. Lot 52, 2-year-old bay mare. Lot 53, pair of goats. Lot 54, 1 miniature horse, male, unbroken, height 28 inches. That last one caught Sandy's attention. She hadn't come to buy anything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Truth be told, she barely had $50 left in her checking account. But curiosity tugged at her when they led out the tiny horse, a shaggy, mud-caked creature no taller than her knee, with tangled blonde mane and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to watch everything. He wasn't impressive, like the glossy quarter horses some ranchers brought. He looked more like a forgotten toy left out in the rain. The auctioneer sighed into the mic. "Do I hear $10? 10.5? 3? $1? 50 cents? A murmur rolled through the small crowd, laughter mixed with pity. No one wanted him. Before Sandy could think, her hand went up. 50 cents, she said quietly. The hammer fell. Sold to the lady in the flannel shirt. The crowd chuckled, but Sandy just grinned. She'd spent $50 on something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way his eyes had met hers, calm and oddly sure, as if he knew something she didn't. Sandy had moved to these mountains 6 months ago after quitting her job at a Denver marketing firm. Burnout, heartbreak, and the constant buzz of city noise had pushed her past her limit. She sold everything she owned except her pickup truck, a few boxes of clothes, and her old dog, Scout. Now she lived in a rented cabin above Hollow Creek, surrounded by whispering pines and long stretches of silence. The quiet had healed something inside her, but it also left her lonely. That tiny horse, standing uncertainly in her borrowed trailer, didn't seem like much. But as she drove up the narrow dirt road toward home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just changed the course of her life. When they reached her cabin, she unloaded the horse carefully. Scout barked once, tail wagging, as if welcoming a new friend. The horse snorted and stamped, shaking off bits of straw. "Well, you're a strange one," Sandy said softly, kneeling to check his hooves. "What should I call you?" He nudged her arm with his soft muzzle, and she laughed. "All right, how about Nugget?" The name seemed to fit, something small, rough, and maybe, just maybe, precious. That night a storm rolled in. Wind lashed the trees, and rain drummed the tin roof. Sandy couldn't sleep. She got up twice to check on Nugget in the old shed she used as a stable. He stood calmly inside, unbothered by thunder chewing hay. When she brought him an extra blanket, he turned his head toward her and nickered softly, a sound that felt almost like thanks. Something about his presence made the night less lonely. In the days that followed, Nugget proved himself clever in ways Sandy didn't expect. He learned to unhook latches, find hidden apples, and follow her around like a dog. One morning, she caught him tugging on Scout's rope toy, playing tug-of-war, while the old retriever wagged his tail in delight. Neighbors who passed by on the dirt road laughed when they saw him. "That thing's not a horse," old Mr. Jameson said, leaning on his mail truck. "Looks more like a fuzzy squirrel." "Maybe," Sandy replied, smiling. "But he's got heart." A week later, while clearing brush behind the cabin, Nugget disappeared. Sandy panicked. She searched the woods for nearly 2 hours, calling his name until her throat went raw. Finally, Scout barked sharply from a ridge above the creek. When she climbed up, she found Nugget standing at the entrance of an old, half-collapsed tunnel, something she'd never noticed before, hidden by thick vines and moss-covered stones. "What on earth?" she murmured, brushing dirt from the archway. The entrance looked ancient, carved by hand. Inside, darkness swallowed the narrow passage. Nugget pawed at the ground, snorting excitedly. "Come on, boy," Sandy said, her voice shaking a little. "Let's get you back." But Nugget refused to move. He kept pawing, striking something hard beneath the dirt. The sound echoed, metallic, deep. Sandy crouched down, pulling away roots and mud. Beneath the soil she found a glint, faint but unmistakable, Gold. For a moment she froze. It couldn't be. Not real gold. She brushed more away, revealing the edge of a small bar, heavy and cold in her hands. Her breath caught in her throat. "Where did you find this nugget?" she whispered. The little horse shook his mane and snorted again, pawing at the ground like he wanted her to keep going. By the time the sun set, she had unearthed 5 small gold bars, each tarnished with age, but unmistakably real. That night, Sandy sat on her porch with the bars lined up on the table beside her. Scout lay at her feet, and Nugget grazed quietly in the field. The mountains around her glowed blue in the fading light. She didn't know what to do. If she told anyone, the landowner might claim it. If she kept digging, she might find more or trouble. 50 cents for a horse. And now this. Sandy ran her fingers over one of the bars, its weight solid and ancient. Somewhere deep down, she felt the same electric certainty she'd felt at the auction, that her life had just changed, but she couldn't yet see how deep the story went, or how much the mountains still kept hidden. As the wind rustled through the pines, Nugget lifted his head and looked straight at her. For a moment, his eyes seemed to shimmer like the gold itself, bright, knowing, and impossibly old. The next morning, Sandy woke before sunrise. Her sleep had been fitful. Images of glittering gold and shadowed tunnels kept replaying in her mind. When the first light spilled over the ridgeline, she pulled on her boots, packed a flashlight, a shovel, and a thermos of coffee, and headed toward the tunnel where Nugget had been digging. Nugget trotted beside her, snorting softly as mist drifted off the creek. Scout bounded ahead, tail wagging, always eager for a new adventure. The forest was silent, except for the whisper of pine needles and the crunch of frost beneath her boots. Sandy stopped at the mouth of the tunnel, heart thudding. In daylight, it looked even stranger. Carved into the side of a small hill, the arch framed with stone that looked too precise to be natural. Moss grew thick along its edges, and faint chisel marks scarred the rock, as if someone long ago had labored here with care. She knelt to examine the spot where she'd found the gold bars. The hole had partly caved in overnight, but she could still see the shimmer of metal peeking from the mud. "All right, Nugget," she whispered, resting a hand on the tiny horse's neck. "Let's see what you found, huh?" He gave a quiet nicker, eyes bright. For the next 2 hours, Sandy dug. She unearthed not just 1 or 2, but 3 more bars, each small but unmistakably gold. Her hands shook as she set them beside her pack. By mid-morning, she sat back, exhausted but exhilarated. 7 gold bars, she said aloud, trying to make it sound real. Scout barked once, as if counting for her. Sandy laughed nervously. "What am I supposed to do with this?" It wasn't just the gold, it was what it meant. Who had left it there? How long had it been hidden? And how had a miniature horse known exactly where to dig? When she finally returned to the cabin, she wrapped the bars in an old flannel blanket and hid them under a loose floorboard beside the wood stove. She didn't trust banks, not for something like this. Not yet. The next few days were strange. She went about her routine, feeding Scout and Nugget, chopping wood, hiking down to Hollow Creek for supplies, but her mind kept circling back to the tunnel. Curiosity burned inside her, along with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Sandy had spent years feeling like life had passed her by. Her ex-boyfriend had called her a dreamer without direction. Her old boss had said she was too sentimental for corporate work. Now, here she was, a mountain woman with a 50-cent horse and a secret worth millions buried in her backyard. One evening, as the sun bled red behind the peaks, a pickup truck pulled into her driveway. The rumble startled her. She hadn't had visitors since moving here. The door opened, and a tall man in a canvas jacket stepped out. His beard was streaked with gray, and his eyes were sharp, assessing. "Evening, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Tom Avery. I'm a prospector." "Got a cabin down near Bear Ridge." Sandy nodded cautiously. "What can I do for you?" He smiled politely, but didn't meet her eyes. "Heard you bought yourself a pony at the auction last week." "Cute little thing." Her stomach tightened. "Word travels fast around here." "Sure does," he said, glancing toward the field where Nugget grazed. Funny thing, folks been talking about a tunnel up this way. Some kind of old Spanish mine. Never could find it myself. Sandy's pulse quickened. I don't know anything about that, she lied. Tom studied her a moment longer, then smiled again, thin, knowing. Well, if you ever do, you let me know. There's history in these hills. Treasure, maybe. People say the old miners hid things when the floods came back in the 1800s. I'll keep that in mind, Sandy said, forcing a calm she didn't feel when he finally drove off. She stood in the fading light, heart pounding. Scout growled low. Nugget stamped his tiny hoof. Later, unable to sleep, she stepped outside. The night sky glittered with stars, and the world was still, except for the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots. From the ridge, the tunnel entrance looked like a dark mouth against the white hillside. She turned toward it and froze. Footprints, fresh. Ones, they weren't hers. Someone had been up there recently. Her flashlight beam caught a flash of something metallic. Near the tunnel entrance, a crowbar. Half buried in snow, her heart pounded. Avery, she whispered. She ran back to the cabin, locking the door behind her. Scout barked, alert. Nugget neighed sharply in the distance. Through the window, she thought she saw movement by the tree line, a shadow, quick and low. Then nothing. She stood there for a long time, breathing hard. Finally, she whispered to herself, all right. If he wants a fight, he's got one. The next morning, the first streaks of dawn lit the ridge. Sandy strapped on her snow boots, loaded her rifle, the one her father had taught her to shoot as a teenager, and saddled. Nugget with small panniers. She wasn't going to wait for trouble to find her. If Avery thought the mountain's treasure was his to take, he was about to learn what kind of woman he was dealing with. Sandy Smith might have come to Hollow Creek broken and broke, but now she had something worth defending. Something the mountain itself seemed to have trusted her with, and she'd defend it to her last breath. The morning sun rose over Hollow Creek, painting the snowbound peaks in gold and rose. Frost clung to every branch, every fence post, every breath. Sandy Smith tightened her scarf and adjusted the small saddle packs on Nugget's back. Scout trotted at her side, tail stiff and ears alert. Her breath came in white puffs. All right, boy, she murmured to Nugget. We'll see how much Avery really knows. The mountain was silent, except for the creak of her boots and the faint jingle of Nugget's halter. Sandy followed the trail of footprints from the night before, deep, heavy, leading straight toward the hidden tunnel. Halfway up the ridge, she found proof she hadn't imagined it. The snow around the tunnel entrance was trampled, and the crowbar she'd spotted earlier lay half buried, its handle cracked. Someone had tried to pry deeper inside and failed. She crouched, gloved fingers brushing the ground. There were drag marks, as if something had been hauled out of the tunnel, but dropped again. Then she saw it, a single gold bar, half hidden under a clump of snow. Her pulse spiked. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, then froze at a sound behind her, the faint crunch of footsteps. Sandy turned slowly. At the tree line, about 50 yards away, stood Tom Avery, rifle slung over one shoulder. That same easy grin on his weathered face. "Morning, Miss Smith," he called. "Beautiful day for a walk, ain't it?" Sandy's heart raced, but her voice stayed steady. "You're trespassing. Don't mean no harm," he said, taking a step closer. "Heard there's something interesting buried up here. Thought maybe we could share." "Share?" she scoffed. "You mean steal?" Tom's smile didn't waver. "Funny word, that. Depends who you think it belongs to." He looked past her toward the tunnel, eyes glittering. "Now why don't you let me take a peek? I'll make it worth your while." Sandy lifted her chin. "Not a chance." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Nugget stamped his hoof sharply, as if sensing the tension. Tom's gaze flicked toward the little horse, amusement in his tone. "That the 50-cent wonder? Folks been laughing about that all week. Didn't figure he'd be guarding treasure." Sandy's grip tightened on her shovel. "You take one more step, and you'll find out what else he guards." Tom chuckled, but his voice carried an edge now. "You think you can stop me, lady?" Before she could answer, Scout barked furiously. The dog lunged forward, teeth bared. Tom flinched, raising his arm, and Sandy seized the chance. She swung the shovel hard, striking the snow beside his boots. The sharp sound cracked the still air. Tom stumbled back, swearing. "You're crazy! Get off my land!" she hissed. He glared at her for a long, dangerous second. Then he spat into the snow and turned. "This ain't over, Smith. You can't keep something like that secret. People talk." He trudged back through the trees, leaving muddy tracks behind. Sandy didn't breathe until the sound of his boots vanished down the ridge. She knelt beside Nugget, stroking his muzzle. "Good boy. You kept your cool better than I did." He nuzzled her shoulder in reply. The encounter left her shaken, but one thing was clear. Tom Avery knew. He'd seen the tunnel, maybe even part of the gold. And if he'd told anyone else, word would spread fast. She needed to act before this turned into a war. That night, she packed a rucksack with supplies, rope, lantern oil, a crowbar, and the old Jameson journal. Her plan was simple: move the gold deeper into the tunnel. Somewhere only she and Nugget could find it. Mr. Jameson, the mailman, had offered to help when she'd told him the truth, but she couldn't risk dragging him into danger. This was her fight. By lamplight, she reread the journal entry that guided her most. "The mountain gives to those who listen. The gold is only its whisper." Sandy looked at Nugget, who stood quietly by the door, as if he understood every word. "Then I'm listening," she said softly. They left just after midnight. The forest was a silver dream, the snow glowing faintly beneath a full moon. Scout led the way, his paws leaving perfect prints in the powder. When they reached the tunnel, Sandy set her lantern down and exhaled. The air inside was still cold and damp, but somehow calmer than before. She moved past the first chamber, deeper this time. The tunnel twisted, narrowing into a passage barely wide enough for her and Nugget to squeeze through. Roots brushed her hair, and icy droplets fell from the ceiling. Finally, the passage opened into another hidden chamber. The beam of her lantern swept across the space, and she froze. It wasn't empty. An old wooden cart sat in the center, filled with raw ore and broken tools. Beside it stood a stone wall carved with symbols, circles, sunbursts, and mountain shapes intertwined. Sandy stepped closer, heart pounding. This wasn't just a mine," she whispered. "It was sacred." At the base of the wall lay something unexpected, a small wooden box with a brass clasp. She knelt and opened it carefully. Inside lay a handful of gold flakes, a rusted pickaxe head, and a folded piece of parchment. The writing was faint, but she could still read the words. "To the finder of this place, guard the gift of Hollow Creek. Do not trade it for greed. Its worth lies not in coin, but in what it builds." Sandy sat back stunned. This wasn't just a stash, it was a legacy. Eli Jameson had hidden his fortune not to enrich himself, but to preserve the land, maybe even the people who lived here. She looked at Nugget, his small frame outlined in lamplight. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "You always know where to go." The little horse pawed the ground, then turned his head toward the wall, as if pointing to something. Sandy followed his gaze. Beneath one of the carved sunbursts was a faint crack. She pressed her fingers to it, and a section of stone shifted loose, revealing a small tunnel leading deeper still. Her breath caught. There was more, but before she could investigate, a distant noise made her freeze. Boots crunching on snow, voices. Tom Avery wasn't alone this time. She extinguished the lantern, plunging the chamber into darkness. Nugget stayed still, barely breathing. Sandy pressed a hand to his neck, whispering, "Quiet, boy." The voices grew louder, echoing faintly through the main tunnel. "Told you she's been digging out here. Can't be far. If we find that gold, we're set for life." Sandy's pulse thundered in her ears. Slowly, she backed toward the hidden wall. The crack she'd uncovered was narrow, but just wide enough for her and Nugget. She squeezed through, pressing herself into the darkness, listening as the intruder's flashlight swept across the first chamber. "Damn, look at this," one of them said. "She already found some." Tom's voice followed, colder now. "Then she knows the way. Keep looking. We'll smoke her out if we have to." Sandy clutched Nugget's halter, heart hammering. In the silence that followed, she made a decision. She wasn't running anymore. She was going to protect Eli Jamison's legacy and the mountain that had given her a second chance, and when the time came, she'd make sure Tom Avery learned what it meant to cross a woman of the mountains. Sandy crouched in the narrow crevice behind the stone wall, every muscle tense. Nugget pressed close beside her, his breath warm against her shoulder. Beyond the thin wall, flashlight beams flickered through the dark, slicing across the first chamber where she'd stood minutes ago. She could hear the men talking, Tom Avery and at least two others. Their boots scraped against stone, their voices low and greedy. "Over here," one of them said. "There's a tunnel leading down." Tom's voice followed, sharp and impatient. "Don't just stand there, dig. If she's been hiding gold down here, I'm not leaving empty-handed." Sandy's heart pounded. She clutched Nugget's halter tighter, whispering, "Stay quiet, boy. Just a little longer." Scout was still outside somewhere. She prayed he'd keep his distance. A faint rumble echoed through the walls as one of the men struck rock with a pickaxe. The sound vibrated through the passage, shaking loose bits of dust. Sandy knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. The crack in the stone wall wasn't meant for people. It was an old ventilation tunnel, small and jagged. If they broke through the main chamber, they'd find her trapped. She needed another way out. She raised her flashlight carefully, shielding its glow with her palm. The tunnel behind her sloped downward, narrow and uneven. Air drifted through it, cold, but faintly moving. That meant it led somewhere. Sandy took a deep breath. "All right, Nugget. Let's see where this goes." The little horse snorted softly and stepped forward without hesitation. They squeezed through the passage, scraping against stone and roots. The air grew colder, damper, and the faint scent of mineral water filled her nose. After about 20 yards, the tunnel widened, and Sandy nearly gasped aloud. Before her stretched a vast underground chamber, the ceiling lost in shadow. Stalactites glimmered faintly in her light, and a shallow pool mirrored the glow like glass. But what truly stole her breath was the wall opposite her. Gold veins, not bars, not coins, pure veins of gold running like frozen lightning through the rock face, glowing faintly under her light. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is it. The real vein." She approached slowly, her boots crunching over old planks and mining debris. Dozens of pickaxes, lanterns, and wooden supports lay abandoned, evidence of miners long gone. At the base of the wall sat an old crate with the Jameson sunburst symbol carved into it. Inside were tools, parchment maps, and a rusted tin box. She pried it open carefully. Inside lay a folded letter, written in the same familiar hand as the journal. "If you find this, you have reached the heart of Hollow Creek. Do not take it all. Leave enough for the mountain to live. The gold is not a gift, it is a pact." Sandy sat back overwhelmed. It wasn't just treasure, it was history, a legacy of restraint and respect. Eli Jamison had found unimaginable wealth and still chosen to hide it, to preserve the mountain rather than strip it bare. And now she understood why Nugget had led her here. The horse hadn't been lucky. He'd been guided. Somehow, in ways she couldn't explain, the mountain itself had chosen her too. But above her, the sounds of the intruders grew louder. A faint crash echoed through the stone, followed by Tom's angry voice. "She's been down here." Fresh tracks, see? They were getting closer. Sandy's mind raced. The new chamber had another tunnel leading upward, narrow but passable. She'd have to move fast. "Come on, Nugget," she whispered. "We're not letting them ruin this place." The tiny horse followed obediently as she extinguished her lantern and began climbing the sloping passage. She kept one hand on the wall for balance, the other clutching the journal and letter. Behind them, a beam of light swept through the crack in the stone wall. Tom Avery's voice boomed, "There!" She went through here. Panic surged, but Sandy didn't stop. She climbed faster, scraping her knees and tearing her gloves. The tunnel twisted sharply, then split into two directions, one rising toward a faint glimmer of daylight, the other plunging deeper into darkness. She hesitated only a moment before choosing the light. After several agonizing minutes, she crawled out into open air, onto a snowy ledge halfway up the mountain. The view spread out before her, the valley below, the frozen creek, and her cabin in the distance. She collapsed against the rock, gasping. Nugget climbed out beside her, his tiny hooves slipping on the ice. "You're incredible," she breathed, stroking his mane. "You really are." Below, faint shouts echoed from the tunnel entrance. Tom and his men had realized she'd escaped. Sandy spotted them, tiny figures far below, flashlights bobbing as they ran across the snow. She didn't wait. She scrambled along the ridge, searching for a way down. The ledge was narrow, the drop steep, but a small deer trail wound through the trees to a slope that would lead her home. "Come on, Nugget," she said, leading him carefully. They descended slowly, slipping on patches of ice. The sun had begun to sink, painting the sky in bruised pink and amber. Every breath burned in her lungs, but she didn't stop until she reached the cabin. Scout barked wildly when he saw her. Sandy pulled the door open, stumbling inside. She set the journal and letter on the table and locked the door tight. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from adrenaline. She'd found the true heart of the mine. She knew now what Eli Jameson had meant. But Tom Avery wouldn't stop. He'd seen enough to keep digging, and if he reached that chamber, he'd destroy everything for greed. Sandy stared into the fire, fists clenched. "Not while I'm breathing," she muttered. Nugget stood by the window, gazing toward the mountains as snow began to fall again. His reflection shimmered in the glass, small but unyielding, a symbol of resilience, of something greater than luck. Sandy reached down and brushed his mane. "You found gold, Nugget, but I think you found something better too, a reason to fight." That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she made a plan. Tomorrow she would gather the gold bars she'd already uncovered, seal the tunnel entrance, and contact Mr. Jameson for help. Together, they could petition to protect the land as a historic site, maybe even prevent future mining. But first, she had to deal with Tom Avery. He'd crossed a line, and she wasn't about to let him dig up the mountain's heart. As the fire crackled low and the wind howled outside, Sandy's reflection flickered in the window beside Nugget's, a woman, a horse, and a mountain bound by fate, and dawn would bring the reckoning. By morning, the mountain had vanished beneath a wall of white. Snow whipped sideways across the valley, howling through the pines like a living thing. The storm had rolled in faster than the forecast predicted, cutting visibility to mere feet. Sandy stood by the cabin window, wrapped in her heavy parka, watching the blizzard swallow the trail. Nugget stood near the hearth, nibbling hay from a bucket. Scout rested at her feet, ears flicking toward every sound of wind or shifting branch. She'd spent half the night packing the gold bars she'd found and hiding them beneath the cabin floorboards. The letter from Eli Jameson rested safely in her jacket pocket, along with the journal. Outside, she knew Tom Avery and his men were still somewhere on the mountain. The storm would slow them, but not stop them. They were greedy, desperate, and Tom was too obsessed to quit. Sandy turned away from the window and began her preparations. She filled 2 canteens, packed trail mix and jerky, and strapped her old revolver to her belt. She hadn't fired it in years, but just the weight of it steadied her nerves. She looked at Nugget. "You ready for round 2, little man?" The tiny horse flicked his tail, as if in answer. Sandy smiled faintly. "That's what I thought." She knelt beside Scout, rubbing his ears. "You stay close today, okay? If something happens, if I don't come back, you go to Mr. Jameson's ranch. You know the way." Scout licked her hand, unwilling to understand anything but loyalty. With a deep breath, Sandy opened the cabin door. A blast of icy wind nearly tore it from her grip. Snow swirled in, coating the floor instantly. "Let's go," she said, pulling her hood tight and stepping into the storm. Visibility was almost zero. The world had become a white blur, the trail erased. But Nugget seemed unfazed, trotting ahead with steady confidence, as though he knew exactly where to go. Sandy followed him toward the lower slopes, retracing their path toward the mine. Every step was a fight, wind clawing at her clothes, snow stinging her cheeks. Halfway there, Scout barked once, sharp and alert. Sandy stopped. Through the veil of snow, faint movement flickered near the tree line. Then a shout cut through the wind. "Sandy!" Tom Avery. Her stomach dropped. He stumbled out of the whiteout, his coat torn, face raw from cold. Two men followed, one limping, the other clutching a pickaxe. "Tom," she called, voice rising over the gale. "Go home, there's nothing for you here." He laughed bitterly, snow plastering his hair. "Don't play dumb. I know what's down there. You found gold, didn't you?" Sandy took a step back, hand resting on her holster. "That gold doesn't belong to you, or me. It belongs to this land, and you'll destroy it if you touch it." Tom's eyes gleamed with the fever of obsession. "You think I care about that? I've spent 10 years chasing this mountain's secret. You think I'll stop now because some mountain woman tells me about nature's feelings?" He took another step forward, boots crunching in the snow. Sandy raised her revolver, not to shoot, but to warn. "That's close enough." The wind howled between them, whipping snow sideways. Tom sneered. "You won't pull that trigger." Nugget stamped the ground, ears flat. Scout growled, fur bristling. Sandy's voice came low and even. "Try me!" For a moment no one moved. The storm raged around them, snow swirling like ghosts of old miners. Then a thunderous crack split the air, not from her gun, but from the mountain itself, an avalanche. The slope above them groaned, a deep rumble that turned into a roar. Sandy's blood froze. "Run!" she screamed. She grabbed Nugget's halter and bolted sideways toward the ravine, Scout sprinting beside her. Behind her, Tom shouted orders, but the wind drowned his words. The avalanche hit like a freight train. Snow and rock thundered down the mountain, swallowing trees, smashing boulders, burying the old mining trail under tons of white fury. The ground shook as Sandy dove behind a fallen log, wrapping her arms around Nugget. Scout wedged himself against her, barking wildly. It lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. When the sound faded, silence fell, heavy and eerie. The entire slope below had disappeared beneath a new blanket of snow. Tom Avery and his men were nowhere to be seen. Sandy's chest heaved as she lifted her head, coughing out cold air. Her ears rang, her hands numb. But she was alive. Nugget snorted softly, his tiny frame trembling. Scout whimpered once, then licked her face. She looked down the buried valley and whispered, "It's over," but deep inside, she knew it wasn't. Hours later, when the storm began to fade, Sandy made her way cautiously back to the cabin. The path was unrecognizable, whole trees uprooted, rocks buried, the air thick with the scent of crushed pine. By the time she reached her door, dusk was falling again. She collapsed by the fire, thawing her hands while Nugget and Scout huddled close. She wanted to believe Tom hadn't survived, but a part of her knew men like him rarely vanished so easily. Still, the avalanche had sealed the old tunnels for good. The mountain had made its choice, and Sandy would honor that. 2 days later, the storm passed entirely. The valley glittered under sunlight, pure and untouched. Sandy saddled her truck with what supplies she could and loaded Nugget carefully in the trailer. Scout jumped into the cab beside her. They drove down to Mr. Jameson's ranch. When the old man saw her step out, pale, exhausted but alive, he nodded once. "You found it, didn't you?" She handed him the letter. "Your ancestor wasn't just a miner. He was a guardian." Jameson read the note in silence, then smiled faintly. "Seems the mountain chose you, Miss Smith." Sandy gazed toward the distant peaks. "Maybe it chose us both." Together they agreed to protect Hollow Creek. The Jameson family would use their legal clout to register the mine as a conservation site. Sandy would act as caretaker, ensuring no one disturbed what lay beneath. She didn't tell anyone about the few gold bars she'd kept hidden, the ones she planned to use to rebuild her life. Repair the cabin and maybe, just maybe, start something new. That small fortune wasn't greed, it was gratitude. As she stood by the fence, Nugget beside her, she whispered, "You turned 50 cents into a miracle." "Little guy," the horse flicked his ears, snorted softly, and nudged her pocket, where she kept his apple treats. Sandy laughed. Yeah, you earned it." But as the wind shifted through the valley, she thought she heard something faint, a voice carried by the mountains, a warning. Or perhaps a promise. The story wasn't done yet, because somewhere beneath the snow, the mountains still slept, and Tom Avery's greed had not yet gone cold. 3 weeks passed before the mountains stirred again. Sandy had fallen into a rhythm, splitting firewood in the mornings, checking the frozen creek for runoff, brushing Nugget until his coat gleamed like copper in the sun. The storm had transformed Hollow Creek into a silent world of white and silver. Untouched and sacred, she'd started to believe peace might last. Then, one evening, Scout began to growl. At first, she thought it was a fox nosing around the woodpile. But the growl deepened, a sound she'd never heard from him before. It wasn't curiosity, it was warning. Sandy froze. "Scout, what is it?" The dog stood by the door, fur bristling, eyes fixed on the snow-dark window. Nugget shifted restlessly in his corner stall, and then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate bangs. Sandy's pulse spiked. Nobody knocked on her door this deep into winter. Not unless something was wrong, or very, very right. She moved to the window and peered through the frost. A figure stood outside, covered in snow and wrapped in a torn parka. The face was obscured by a scarf and hood, but something in the stance, a slight lean, the way the shoulders set, made her heart twist. She unlatched the door slowly, revolver in hand. "Who's there?" The figure lifted his head. "Tom Avery," he rasped. He looked nothing like the arrogant man she'd faced in the blizzard. His beard was overgrown, his eyes hollow. Frost clung to his lashes, and his hands shook as he held them up in surrender. "I'm not here to fight," he said weakly. "Please, just some food. I've been wandering for days." Sandy hesitated. Her instinct screamed to slam the door in his face. But the mountain woman in her, the one who'd been raised on hard winters and harder lessons, couldn't turn away a starving man. "Come in," she said flatly. "But one wrong move and you're back out there." Tom stumbled inside, collapsing near the fire. Scout hovered close, growling softly. Nugget snorted from the stall, stamping once in warning. Sandy ladled stew from the pot and handed it over. He ate like someone who hadn't seen food in weeks. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different. The feverish greed was gone, replaced by something older. "Fear. I thought I was dead," he muttered. "After the avalanche, I woke under a snowdrift. Couldn't move my legs for 2 days. When I finally crawled out, my men were gone." Sandy said nothing. She just watched him, arms crossed. He swallowed hard. "You were right. About the mountain, about the gold." Her brows lifted. "You had an epiphany under 10 feet of snow?" He gave a weak, humorless laugh. "You could say that. I saw things down there, old tunnels, collapsed shafts, bones. Like the mountain was warning me." Sandy's jaw tightened. "It's been warning a lot of people. You're just the first one who listened." For a while, neither spoke. Only the fire crackled. Finally, Tom leaned forward, hands clasped. "Look, Sandy, I don't want to fight anymore. I came back because there's something else down there. Something you should see." Her stomach knotted. "You went back?" "Not deep, just far enough to find one of the old miners' tunnels. I swear, I didn't take anything. But there's a lower chamber, you missed it." "The avalanche uncovered part of it," Sandy frowned. She didn't like the way his eyes flickered as he spoke, too much excitement creeping back into them. "What's down there?" she asked carefully. He hesitated, then said, "A vein. Bigger than the one you found. It glows, Sandy, like fire trapped in stone," she sighed. "You're still chasing ghosts," Tom's voice hardened. "You think I want to? That mine nearly killed me. But whatever's under there, it's not just gold. It's something else, and it's humming." "Humming?" He nodded slowly. "When I was down there, I felt it in my chest, like the whole mountain was alive." Sandy sat back, arms crossed. She didn't know what to make of him. He could be lying. He could be delirious. But the mountain had done stranger things already. She glanced at Nugget. The little horse had gone still, staring toward the door as though he understood every word. Tom followed her gaze and gave a faint smile. "That's the one who found it all, huh?" Sandy's tone softened despite herself. "Yeah, 50 cents well spent," he laughed weakly. "Guess I paid a little more for my lesson." That night she let him sleep by the fire. She didn't trust him fully, but she couldn't turn away, someone broken by the same mountain that had tested her. When dawn came, The storm had cleared, leaving the peaks sharp and blue against the sky. Tom stirred, groaning as he sat up. "You still have that map?" he asked quietly. "The one from the journal?" Sandy eyed him. "Why? I just need to see it again." She shook her head. "You've seen enough gold to last a lifetime," but something in his tone, a quiet desperation, made her pause. He wasn't talking about greed anymore. He was afraid. Later that afternoon, as she checked her snares by the ridge, she saw tracks in the snow. 2 sets, hers and another pair leading away from the cabin. She followed them to the tree line. Tom Avery was gone, and he'd taken one of her lanterns. Her pulse quickened. "No!" She whistled sharply for Scout, who bounded toward her through the snow. Nugget snorted from the porch, as if sensing what had happened. Sandy gritted her teeth, whispering, "If he went back to that mine, he won't come out again." She packed her bag and strapped on her revolver. By dusk, she was halfway up the slope, the wind biting at her cheeks. Scout padded beside her, nose to the ground. Nugget followed steadily, sure-footed despite the ice. As night fell, they reached the old mine entrance. The avalanche had sealed most of it, but now a new hole gaped open where the snow had melted and shifted. A lantern flickered inside. Sandy clenched her fists. "Damn it, Tom!" She ducked through the opening, the air cold and heavy with the scent of earth. Her breath echoed against the stone. Deeper in, she saw the light ahead, swaying. Tom stood before a jagged wall of quartz, staring at something glowing within the rock. He turned when he heard her. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Sandy," he whispered, "it's not gold. Look." Before he could finish, the ground beneath them shuddered, then split with a deep groaning sound. The light in the wall flared bright as fire. Sandy screamed, "Tom, get back!" But the earth gave way, swallowing them both into the dark. The fall felt endless. Stone, air, and cold swallowed Sandy as the world spun in chaos around her. Her flashlight smashed somewhere in the dark, and she hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. For several seconds, there was nothing but ringing silence. Then a groan. "Tom!" she gasped. "I'm here," came his weak voice, echoing through the void. Sandy blinked through the darkness. Her palms scraped against cold rock as she struggled upright. The faint glow from the cracked wall above flickered like a dying star, but beneath it, faint light shimmered, soft, golden, pulsing. The air felt alive. "Nugget!" "Scout!" she called. No response, only a distant whinny muffled by stone. They hadn't fallen in with her. Relief washed over her even as dread built in her gut. She turned back to Tom. "You okay?" He was sitting against a boulder, clutching his leg. "Sprained, maybe broken." "Damn it, Sandy. What is this place?" Sandy lifted the lantern that had fallen near her. The glass was cracked, but the flame still burned faintly. When she raised it high, her breath caught. They were standing in an enormous underground chamber, bigger than any she'd seen before. The walls glittered like stars, lined with veins of gold and quartz that glowed faintly on their own, as if charged with energy. Pools of clear water mirrored the light, but at the center of it all stood something impossible. A towering column of stone shot upward from the earth, wrapped in golden veins that pulsed like a heartbeat. It emitted a soft, low hum, vibrating in her chest like distant thunder. Tom stared, slack-jawed. "It's alive," he whispered. "The mountain's alive." Sandy stepped closer, awe washing through her like warmth. The hum grew louder with each step, not frightening but welcoming, like recognition. "It's the heart," she murmured. "The real heart of Hollow Creek." Tom dragged himself closer, grimacing in pain. "You realize what this is worth, don't you?" Sandy shot him a sharp look. "Don't start. I'm not talking about mining it. This could be energy, some natural phenomenon, something the world's never seen." She studied him carefully. His eyes gleamed again, not greed this time, but wonder. "I think this is what Eli Jameson found," she said softly. "And why he stopped digging," Tom frowned. "You think he saw this?" She nodded. "And he realized it shouldn't be disturbed. That's why he left those warnings." The hum seemed to respond, deepening in pitch until the rock itself vibrated under their feet. Tom took a cautious step forward. If that's true, maybe we can still study it carefully. Bring in geologists, scientists. Sandy's voice hardened. Tom, listen to yourself. The last time people tried to study this mountain, they nearly destroyed it. He hesitated, torn. I'm not like them anymore. But the light from the heart grew brighter, casting gold across his face, and something flickered there. Hunger, fascination. The same old pull. Sandy moved between him and the column. No closer, he met her eyes. You can't stop me from touching it. Try me. Before either could move, a sharp crack echoed through the chamber. One of the golden veins in the column split open, releasing a burst of brilliant light. Sandy shielded her eyes. What's happening? Tom stumbled back, shouting. The vibration, it's increasing. The ground trembled. Water sloshed violently in the pools. Rocks fell from the ceiling like rain. Sandy grabbed Tom's arm. We have to go now! But Tom resisted. No, I can't leave it. He reached out toward the column. The instant his hand brushed the glowing surface, the hum surged into a roar. Tom screamed. A blinding flash engulfed him, and then he was gone. Not crushed, not burned, gone. Sandy staggered back, blinded by tears and light. The chamber shook violently, the gold veins pulsing out of rhythm like a heart under strain. Please, she whispered to the mountain. Stop! I'm not here to hurt you. For a long, terrible moment it seemed like it wouldn't listen. Then slowly the tremors began to ease. The glow dimmed to its earlier gentle pulse. The mountain exhaled. Sandy sank to her knees, trembling. Tom's pickaxe lay on the ground where he'd stood. Its metal twisted and warm to the touch. She didn't know what had happened to him, whether the mountain had taken him or transformed him, or something else entirely. All she knew was that she was still here. She looked up toward the slanted crack they'd fallen through. Faint daylight filtered down through the snow above. The way out was steep, but possible. Her voice cracked as she called, Scout! Nugget, a faint bark answered. Then a small sound, a muffled whinny. Tears filled her eyes. Good boys, I'm coming. The climb took hours. Her arms burned, her boots slipped on icy stone, and her lantern died halfway up. But she didn't stop until she dragged herself through the narrow gap into daylight again. The cold wind hit her face like knives. Nugget whinnied, pawing at the snow near the opening, while Scout barked and leapt at her, tail wagging wildly. Sandy collapsed into the snow, hugging them both. You two are the only gold I'll ever need, she whispered. Behind her, the mountain groaned once more, as if sealing the wound it had opened. Snow drifted down, quietly covering the crack. The heart of Hollow Creek was buried again, safe, hidden, alive. That night, back at the cabin, Sandy sat by the fire with a mug of coffee. Nugget dozed beside her, tiny hooves twitching in his sleep. Scout lay at her feet, chin on her boot. She stared at the flames, seeing flashes of gold in them. Tom's face, the pulse of the mountain. The moment the light swallowed him, she whispered to herself, he wanted to own it. I just wanted to understand. The journal and letter lay open on the table. By firelight, she added her own note at the bottom of the final page. The mountain gives to those who listen. It takes from those who demand. I've seen its heart. It's not gold that makes it valuable. It's life. She closed the book gently and looked toward Nugget. You turned 50 cents into something priceless, she said softly. Not a fortune. A purpose. Outside, the mountain loomed against the starlit sky, silent now. But not dead, watching, waiting, and somewhere deep beneath. The golden veins pulsed once in the dark, like a heartbeat. Steady and eternal, the thaw came slow that year, creeping down from the peaks like cautious fingers. Snowmelt turned to rivulets, rivulets to streams, and soon Hollow Creek ran alive again, gurgling through the valley as if breathing for the first time in months. Sandy stood on the porch with a tin mug of coffee, Nugget grazing in the meadow, and Scout chasing the last stubborn patches of snow. It had been 3 months since the cave collapse. The memory still clung to her dreams, Tom's final scream, the blinding light, and the heartbeat in the mountain's chest. She hadn't gone back since. Some mornings, she'd catch herself looking toward the ridge where the mine lay sealed under snow and stone, half expecting to see a flicker of gold or hear that deep, thrumming hum. But there was only silence and peace. The cabin, once just a shelter from failure, had become home. She'd repaired the roof, built a new corral for Nugget, and planted a garden patch that was beginning to show green shoots. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. That morning the wind shifted. The scent of wet pine filled the air. Sandy looked up to see a truck rumbling along the distant road, Mr. Jameson's old pickup. She smiled faintly and set her mug down. When he stepped out, his gait was slow but steady, his hat shading sharp blue eyes that hadn't dulled with age. "You've been busy," he said. Glancing around the improved homestead, Sandy grinned. "The mountain gives you enough wood and stone, you learn to build." He chuckled, then handed her a folder. "You might want to look at this." Inside were legal papers, official seals, signatures. Her eyes widened. "Is this what I think it is?" "Deed's been transferred," Jameson said. "The state approved our proposal. Hollow Creek and the Jameson Mine are now protected under the Historical and Environmental Conservation Act. You're the official caretaker." Sandy blinked, speechless. How did you?" He shrugged. "Let's just say a few people in the council owe my family a favor. Besides, after reading your journal entry, they couldn't deny it. You turned a miner's myth into a living legacy." Sandy smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson." "Don't thank me," he said softly. "Thank the mountain for picking you." That night, Sandy sat by the fire, the deed framed on the wall above the mantel. Nugget snuffled nearby, and Scout snoozed with his paws twitching in dreams. She was halfway through carving a small wooden horse, something, to hang on the cabin door, when a strange sound caught her. A faint rumble. She froze. Not thunder, not wind, a pulse, slow, steady, deep beneath the floorboards. Her breath caught. No way. She rose and stepped outside. The night was clear, stars shimmering over the black ridges. The creek glittered silver in the moonlight, and then she saw it, a faint golden glow, pulsing in rhythm with that deep vibration, emanating from beneath the snow near the slope. Nugget lifted his head and whinnied softly. Sandy whispered, "It's calling." By dawn, she'd packed a lantern, rope, and her journal. The path to the old mine was still dangerous, half collapsed in places, but she knew it like her own heartbeat now. When she reached the entrance, the air was calm and cool. The avalanche had sealed most of the lower passages, but a new opening had formed, carved by thawing water. Sandy hesitated, hand on the rough stone. "All right," she murmured. "If you got something to show me, I'm listening." She ducked inside. The tunnel twisted down for several minutes before opening into a smaller cavern she didn't remember. The light from her lantern spilled over something half buried in the dirt, a shape, human. Her breath hitched. "Tom." She knelt beside the figure, but what she found wasn't a body. It was stone, a perfectly formed statue, its surface gold-veined quartz, capturing every detail of Tom Avery's face, eyes wide, hand outstretched toward something unseen. Sandy's throat tightened. The mountain hadn't killed him. It had preserved him, turned him into part of itself. She touched the stone gently. "It was warm. I warned you," she whispered. "You wanted to own it, but you became part of it instead." The faint hum grew stronger. From the chamber's center a new fissure glowed, soft, steady. Sandy raised her lantern and saw what lay within, nuggets of pure gold embedded in translucent crystal, shimmering with internal light. But mixed among them were tiny gemstones, sapphires, emeralds and amethyst, nestled like seeds in the rock. It wasn't a vein of metal. It was a growth. The mountain wasn't dying, it was regenerating. Sandy's chest filled with wonder. "You're alive. You're healing yourself." She reached out but stopped short of touching it. "Some treasures weren't meant to be claimed, only witnessed." "I understand," she said softly. "I'll protect you." When she emerged into sunlight hours later, the valley below seemed to shimmer differently, vibrant, renewed. Birds circled the thawing creek, and the wind carried warmth instead of chill. Scout barked from the ridge, tail wagging. Nugget trotted to meet her, mane glowing copper under the sun. Sandy laughed, tears streaking down her dusty cheeks. "We did it, boys. The mountain's alive again." She knelt and hugged them both. "And I think it just said thank you." Over the next few weeks, people began to visit Hollow Creek, environmental teams, conservation photographers, even a few journalists. But Sandy made sure the heart chamber stayed hidden. Only she and Mr. Jameson knew its true location, and neither intended to tell. Instead, she turned the valley into a small sanctuary, a refuge for wild horses and mountain wildlife. Nugget became a local legend. The 50-cent miracle horse, newspapers called him. Children from nearby towns would visit, leaving him apples and ribbons. He'd nuzzle their hands gently, proud and calm, as if he knew he'd earned every story written about him. Sandy never corrected them. She'd smile, wave from her porch, and think, "You have no idea." One evening, as the sun set behind the peaks, Sandy wrote the final entry in Eli Jameson's journal. "The mountain gives back what you honor. I've seen life grow from stone and mercy bloom from ruin. If you ever find this, listen before you dig. Some gold shines brighter when left untouched." She closed the book and placed it beside the deed, the two bound by history and promise. Then she stepped outside, breathing in the scent of spring rain. Nugget grazed peacefully, and Scout chased a rabbit along the edge of the meadow. The wind carried a low, familiar hum from deep within the earth. Steady, gentle, and alive. Sandy smiled. "Good night, Hollow Creek," she whispered. "I'll keep your heart safe, and somewhere under the mountain." The golden pulse answered her like gratitude made sound. 5 years passed, and the mountain never stopped whispering. In that time, Sandy Smith's name traveled farther than she ever imagined. Journalists, conservationists, and travelers came to Hollow Creek to see the woman who'd restored a dying valley. Some called her the Mountain Woman, others called her the Keeper of Gold. But Sandy didn't care for titles. She just saw herself as a woman who'd been given a second chance, by fate, by nature, and by a tiny horse who cost her only 50 cents. The cabin was no longer lonely. It had grown into a small ranch with solar panels, a barn rebuilt from reclaimed timber, and pastures dotted with wildflowers. Nugget roamed freely with a small herd of rescued ponies, his copper mane catching sunlight like molten fire. Tourists often laughed when they met him, the famous Millionaire horse who, rumors had, found gold and changed a woman's life. But Sandy always chuckled when they asked for the real story. "Oh, the gold part's true," she'd say with a wink, "but not the way you think," and she'd leave it at that. One crisp morning in late autumn, Sandy received a letter. The envelope bore an embossed seal, the State Historical and Environmental Council. She opened it by the fire, Nugget nuzzling her shoulder curiously. "Dear Ms. Smith, we are honored to inform you that Hollow Creek Sanctuary and the Jameson Mine Conservation Area have been officially designated as a National Heritage Site. Your stewardship has preserved one of the most unique geological and ecological areas in the region. In recognition of your efforts, the state will fund a permanent visitor and education center in your name. With gratitude, Council Chair Marianne Holt." Sandy set the letter down, speechless. Her name, a woman who once lived out of her truck, who'd nearly lost everything, would now stand in a place she saved by listening to its heart. A week later, she stood at the site where the new education center would be built. The mountains shimmered behind her, snow dusting their peaks like powdered sugar. She placed her hand on Nugget's neck. "You did all this," she whispered. "Guess I owe you more than just hay." Nugget snorted softly, as if in agreement. As they stood there, the air shifted, that same soft vibration she hadn't heard in months, the hum of the mountain. It wasn't loud, but deep, resonant, like a purr through the earth itself. Sandy smiled. "Still watching over us, aren't you?" A faint gust lifted her hair. She swore it carried a familiar scent, smoke, pine, and faint traces of old candle wax from the mine chamber. Eli Jameson's scent. That night, she lit a single candle on the windowsill. It flickered against the glass, a beacon to whatever spirits watched from the ridge. Outside, the stars stretched endless over Hollow Creek. Sandy opened her journal, no longer Eli's, but hers. 5 years ago, I thought I was running away from my failures. Turns out I was running home. The mountain gave me more than gold. It gave me purpose. And every sunrise feels like its own treasure. She closed the book, placed it beside the old one, and looked out at the meadow where Nugget slept under the starlight. She whispered, "Thank you, little guy." Months later, the education center opened to a small crowd of journalists, students and locals. Mr. Jameson, now grey and leaning on a cane, stood at Sandy's side as the ribbon was cut. "This," he said, voice trembling with pride, "is what it means to give back more than you take." The building was simple but beautiful, wood and glass blending with the landscape. Inside, exhibits told the story of Hollow Creek, the geology, the wildlife, the early miners, and one special section called The Heart of the Mountain. It featured Sandy's journals, old photographs, and a lifelike statue of Nugget cast in bronze, head high, eyes alert, as if listening for that deep hum. But one display drew the most attention, a single quartz rock with golden veins running through it, glowing faintly under natural light. The plaque beneath read, "The Living Stone, found deep within Hollow Creek Mine." This specimen symbolizes the enduring bond between humankind and nature. Donated by Sandy Smith, 32, known as the Mountain Woman. Some gold isn't meant to be mined, it's meant to remind. Years rolled on, and time weathered even the strongest hearts, but Hollow Creek remained eternal. Sandy grew older, her hair silvering like moonlight on snow. Yet her hands stayed steady, her laugh just as wild as the wind that swept through the pines. She never left the mountain. Every spring she'd hike to the sealed cave where the golden heart once glowed. She'd place a small offering, a wooden horse she'd carved during winter, and whisper, "For balance." And every time, the wind would rise in answer. One evening, decades later, a young woman arrived at Hollow Creek. She was a university student, sent to study geological energy patterns. Her research led her to the sanctuary, to the legend of a 50-cent horse and the woman who turned a haunted mine into a living wonder. Sandy wasn't there anymore, but the student met an old ranch hand who pointed her toward the ridge. "She's up there," he said with a soft smile. At the overlook, the young woman hiked up at sunrise and found a small memorial stone under a pine tree. It read, "Sandy Smith, the Mountain Woman, 1993-2075. She listened to the earth, and it sang back in gold. Beside it grazed a small herd of wild ponies, descendants of Nugget's line, all with the same copper glint in their manes." As the student stood there, wind brushing her hair, she felt a faint vibration underfoot, a hum. She looked up at the mountain, eyes wide, and she swore she saw, just for a moment, a golden pulse through the rock, and, like a heartbeat, the mountain was alive, and somewhere, somehow, Sandy Smith was still listening. Years after Sandy Smith's passing, Hollow Creek had transformed from a hidden valley into a sacred story, passed down through generations. Tourists came not just to see the mine or the sanctuary, but to feel something, that same quiet pulse that lingered in the ground. Faint but unmistakable. Local elders began calling it the heartbeat of Hollow Creek. Scientists dismissed it as seismic activity, but those who lived near the mountain swore it was something more. They said the hum grew strongest on calm spring mornings when the mist hovered low and the sun struck the ridge just right, the way it had the day Sandy first arrived. The education center became a pilgrimage site for dreamers, wanderers, and those who had lost everything. A mural now covered one wall, Sandy standing with her arms outstretched toward the mountain, Nugget at her side, and behind them, faint lines of golden light radiating from the earth. Beneath the mural was engraved her quote, "The mountain doesn't give gold for greed. It gives gold to those who see its soul." One particularly bright morning, a young girl named Lila arrived with her father. She couldn't have been older than 8, her braids bouncing as she ran across the grass toward the bronze statue of Nugget. "Daddy, she's the lady who saved the mountain, right?" Lila asked, eyes shining. Her father smiled. "That's right, sweetheart. She bought a tiny horse for 50 cents and found more than gold." Lila bent down and pressed her hand against the statue's hoof. "Do you think he still remembers her?" Her father chuckled softly. "Maybe he remembers her in his own way. Maybe every horse that runs free here carries a piece of their story." They didn't notice the faint shimmer of light that danced across the bronze, like sunlight reflecting off rippling water. Later that day, Lila wandered away from the crowd, following a winding trail that led up to the old overlook. She stopped where Sandy's memorial stood under the tall pine. The wind was gentle there and warm. Lila knelt beside the stone and whispered, "I miss Sandy. My teacher says you listened to the ground and it talked back to you. I tried, but I can't hear anything yet." She placed a tiny gift on the rock, a smooth pebble she'd painted, with a little golden heart. "I want to learn to listen too," she said, shyly. Then she closed her eyes and pressed her ear to the ground. For a long moment, there was only the rustle of the pine needles and the faraway call of a hawk, and then thrum, a gentle vibration beneath her cheek, soft and steady. Her eyes flew open and she gasped. The mountain was humming again, not loud, not frightening, but alive. Down in the valley, the sanctuary horses lifted their heads in unison. The copper-maned stallion at the front, a descendant of Nugget, pawed the earth and whinnied toward the ridge. The sound echoed deep and bright, rolling like a song through the hills. Visitors paused, looking around in wonder as the ground seemed to glow faintly gold under the sunlight, and for just a heartbeat. Some swore they saw her, a figure of light at the ridge, wearing her old jacket and wide-brimmed hat, her hair whipping in the wind. A woman standing tall beside a copper horse, looking down over the valley she had once saved. Then the light faded, and the hum settled into silence again. But the legend only grew stronger. From that day on, every child who came to Hollow Creek learned the same lesson, that wealth wasn't buried in the ground, but grown in the heart, that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, the humblest creature, or a simple 50-cent choice could change the world. And when the evening sun dipped behind the peaks, casting everything in a warm golden hue, the locals would say, "The mountain's saying goodnight to Sandy," because even after death, the mountain woman's spirit remained, woven into every root, every stone, and every beat of the golden heart that still pulsed beneath Hollow Creek.